in the early hours. Labour and the Lib Dems have been making some gains so far, as well as the Green Party.
Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is live in Westminster right now for more reaction.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, it is a pretty extraordinary situation, isn't it? Just almost coming up to 12 hours after polls have closed and the dust is beginning to settle. Well, let's get more reaction on what this means for the country and for our politics. I'm delighted to be joined live on College Green outside Parliament now by the former Labour advisor John McTernan and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. John, first of all, the Labour Party advancing in London, but perhaps not so much elsewhere in the country.
Well, it's great to be here in the Labour borough of Westminster to be talking to you. And I think the symbolic nature of the win in Westminster will be worrying a lot of Tories. And I think, looking at the perspective, Boris Johnson's platform for becoming leader and now Prime Minister was because he could win London. So for the Tories to lose so badly in London and to say, oh, look, it's London, I think it should be a worry for them. And starting to look at the broader south and southeast, I think Labour making gains on the coast, the Liberals making gains in the southwest. It feels to me as though there's an anti-Tory coalition across the country, which when you map out the results is going to be very worrying for backbench Tory MPs.
That's an interesting point. We've spoken a lot about London, but actually the southeast and the southwest, that's becoming a problem for the Conservatives as well.
Yeah, look, John is right to say that Labour have done well in London, but I don't think Tories expected, Barnet and Wandsworth to stay blue. I think Westminster was a shocker, that's true. But overall, the Tories may be wrong about this, but they think they can defeat Labour. They don't think the focus has been on Labour yet in any way that will be the case during a general election. The Tories are much more worried, I think, about a Liberal Democrat surge. I call them the bindweed of politics. I think you call them the dry rot of politics. Once they sort of invaded an area, they hold on to an area. And the Tories aren't really sure of how to beat Lib Dems, over a short period of time. And I think we're going to see results in Somerset, where every source I have tells me is going to be very bad. We've seen West Oxfordshire. We've seen other parts like in Wimbledon, where the Liberal Democrats are showing the kind of tenacity and invasiveness that was true sort of 10, 20 years ago, before the coalition years. And that will be what will really worry Tory MPs, I think.
In the run-up to these elections, the Conservative Party chairman, Oliver Dowden, was talking about a potential pact that may have been done between the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party. Now, we know that there was some sort of pact in 1997, or at least the beginnings of that. Is that what we're seeing now as well?
I think what we're seeing is a pact amongst the voters. The voters looking around which party can hit at the Tories the most. And in some areas, like which party can hit at the ruling party in the council. So it could be the Lib Dems, it could be the Greens against the Labour Party. There is a local element, but I don't think there's any formal pact. There's no need for one. If the country's decided it wants to chuck the Tories out, then the country will use whichever party it wants. That, for me, would be the worry if I was a Tory, is that the Liberal Democrats outside London, the only people who can beat the Lib Dems in the southwest turned out to be the Lib Dems by going into coalition. They've got over the coalition thing now, so some areas returning to be Lib Dem, and you're going to see, I think, when we look at the national share of the vote and then apply it to the parliamentary seats, it feels to me you're going to see very efficient use by voters of their vote to send a message to the Tories. So it will not look like a massive Labour surge across the country, but it will look like a Tory collapse.
Just briefly, I think the one problem with this argument is the Greens. If the Greens start to invade too many of these sort of territories, that confuses the picture. And if people start to vote Green in significant numbers, and the Greens have done well in these elections, then that could be the difference in certain seats with the Liberals or Labour winning those tactical voting contests.
Yes, some of these councils, particularly in London, may look like they've been won by a large number of wards, but each ward has been won by a small number of votes. Potentially the vote share here may be a little bit closer. It will be a little bit of a while until we see the projected national share of the vote. But what would be a good result for Labour on that?
Labour in the lead, Labour showing substantial progress from 2019 national votes. And I think, look, Labour had its worst defeat since 1935. Some people say it was a near-death experience. I think it was death. Under Corbyn, the Labour Party was dead. It's coming back to life. So I would say if Labour are projected at getting something like 275 seats at the next election, which would be 75 gains, they would be in a strong position to say we will form a government after the next election, because no other party of any size can support the Tories after an election next time.
Although 75 gains would take the Labour Party up to 275 seats, 276 seats, we would spend a lot of time on this green, potentially for weeks and months after that election, as coalition negotiations were thrashed out.
No, not coalition negotiations. You only have coalition negotiations where different parties can go with other guys. The SNP have no choice but to put the Tories out. The Liberal Democrats have no choice but to put the Tories out. So a minority Labour government simply goes, it's us or the Tories. Vote for our Queen's speech or keep the Tories in. It's fine. We're happy to have a second election on that basis.
I worry if we look towards that. Is this not a similar situation to 1992? Would in some ways the Labour Party have been better served losing 92 and winning bigger in 97? Could potentially the Labour Party be better served losing the next election and then winning bigger the one after that?
It's never good to lose. There's no election that's good to lose, honestly. Being in government gives you the power of government. And the one thing the Tories have taught us under Boris Johnson, and Nicola Sturgeon, to be fair, in Scotland, is government can be a massive platform for campaigning. You can campaign from government, you can use government money, and you watch once Labour ministers were in the minority government, the cash would be splashed in the right places.
Well, let's turn now to Scotland, because, of course, the Conservative Party is expected to not do particularly well, potentially even worse than in London, sliding back to third place. Tim Montgomerie, how bad is it for the Conservative Party in Scotland right now?
Well, of course, the Conservatives have done relatively well in Scotland recently. You know, the Conservatives were very much the third party for a long time in Scotland. So moving into second place, particularly under Ruth Davidson's leadership, was an achievement. Douglas Murray has got himself in some problems, recently by saying that Boris Johnson should go as Tory leader, the Scottish Conservative leader, and then sort of going back on that. He's had a few difficult interviews in the campaign. Anna Samwire, the new Labour leader, is a much more competent figure. So it will be difficult for the Tories in Scotland. But the Tories don't really expect to ever have a majority in Parliament based on Scottish MPs. Labour, in contrast, look like they're going to celebrate moving into second place because of the overnight results. But actually, second place for Labour isn't anywhere near good enough if they hope to be a majority party in Westminster. They've got to start making much more sizable progress than they will do. And that's Labour's general problem in terms of general election positioning. They're just not anywhere near close enough to becoming a majority party. And so what you'll see from the Tories, you're talking about 1992 and 1997, Tom, this will be much more like 2015, when David Cameron was saying it's really a Conservative majority government offering stability to the country, what's going to be some sort of coalition of chaos, accepting John's point that it won't be a formal coalition, but a coalition of chaos with Labour, SNP, Lib Dems in constant sort of battles over to what priorities the government has.
It's a strong argument, I suppose, that idea of single-party government being one that is attractive. Although I suppose the Labour Party, on the other hand, could say that the years after 2015 weren't perhaps as stable as might have been advertised. But there is a concern there, though. That message potentially might be a strong one.
Yeah, look, I think 3 prime ministers since 2015 is not that stable. It's, the issue about elections is, in the end, the voters can't be wrong. We live in a democracy. So the voters will choose what they want to do. At the moment, it feels like these local elections are going to be everybody using the votes they can, the candidates they can, to inflict damage on the Tories. If they did that in an election, a general election, what they'd be wanting is a balanced parliament, a minority government, a hung parliament, whatever you want to call it or characterise it. The issue, I think, can be well summed up by the Tories actually can't win without London. Labour can't win without Scotland. It looks as though both parties are in difficulties in London and in Scotland in different ways. In Scotland, Labour's opportunity for me is to become the unionist party, while the Scottish Tories are weak because of Boris Johnson. So Labour should now go. Anna Samwire is a very likeable leader, very talented leader. He should be going to the seats that Labour used to hold, that the Tories now hold, to Stirling and to Ayr, up into Aberdeenshire, out into Edinburgh, and saying it's safe to vote unionist for the Labour Party. We had Corbyn, I get it, we've now got Starmer. You had, Ruth Davidson, I get it, but you've now got Boris Johnson. So a realignment in Scottish politics may well be one Unionist party and one Nationalist party, and Labour looks set to become able to say we're the right Unionist party for you in Scotland, and that for me is going to be the interesting tale out of Scotland.
So in our final 30 seconds, our last word to you, Tim Montgomerie. Will Conservative MPs be looking at what is starting to take place today? Will they be looking again at the leadership of Boris Johnson, or has he just done about enough to survive this?
I fear he's done just about enough, and I say that as someone who wants him gone, because I think we're wasting this majority of 80. The Tories aren't really reforming the country in any significant way, and I really saw Partygate and all the controversy associated with it as the opportunity to get rid of a Prime Minister who really is only good when he's winning, and if he stopped winning, there's not really much of a point to Boris Johnson anymore. But unfortunately, I fear that he's going to carry on in office now.
Well, thank you both for your excellent analysis here on College Green this morning. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Cheers for joining us. Thanks, back to you in the studio.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. I was fascinated when John McTernan, said, that at the end of the day, when it comes to an election, the voters aren't wrong. The voters have their say, and therefore that has to be right. Well, that's not what we were told during Brexit, was it? And everyone was there trying to reverse what the voters said.
That's true, yes, indeed.
So